In April 1997, in Stockport, Greater Manchester, a 17-year-old girl was abducted at knife point by a stranger. She was held hostage for over 11 hours.
I started to beg him. I didn't show any emotion before, and I was pleading with him not to hurt me.
Unbeknown to his victim, hours before her abduction, the stranger had brutally murdered another innocent woman in a gruesome act of violence.
I've never, ever experienced something as horrific as the circumstances surrounding that case.
The mysterious killer was 27-year-old Nicholas Burton, who did everything he could to prevent being brought to justice.
You've still got no sense of any motive, no reason why has this happened.
Psychiatrists agreed that Burton was one of the most unstable people they'd ever assessed.
This is something that is part of who this man is, and he's going to continue to be a danger.
Nicholas Burton had been exposed as one of Britain's most evil killers. In the early hours of April the 27th, 1997, armed police gathered together, ready to storm a hotel room in North Wales. They were trying to locate a dangerous predator who'd abducted a 17-year-old girl at knife point.
When North Wales police went to arrest Burton, it was for the abduction of Debbie. It was only when they got there and found his room that they realised they were actually arresting a murderer.
As officers searched the hotel room, they discovered evidence that linked their suspect to the cold-blooded and savage murder of 27-year-old assistant bank manager Rachel McGrath the previous day.
In the hotel room, they found Burton's clothing, which was stained in my sister's blood, a black leather jacket, trousers, shoes, and actually the murder weapon, a hunting knife, which is about 24 centimetres long.
This killer's story begins on the edge of the Peak District in the northwest of England. Nicholas Burton was born on the 5th of February, 1970.
He was born and bred in Derbyshire, in New Mills, that sort of area, in a little tiny part of it called Newtown. His parents were lovely.
He was described by his mother at the time as happy-go-lucky.
Nicholas Burton appeared to have quite a normal childhood, and in his early adulthood he was a full-time worker in a factory where his father had been for 30 years.
He'd been educated well, he'd got a steady job, and everything was all going well.
As an adult, Burton began a relationship with a woman who was a singer. She claimed he was a fairly normal guy when they were together.
He was okay, Mr. Joe Public, average sort of person, really.
The relationship fell apart when his girlfriend got a singing job in another part of the country and moved away.
He seemed to take that really badly, that he couldn't deal with that rejection, and he seemed at that point then to spiral, and things changed quite dramatically.
Nicholas Burton started experimenting with alcohol and drugs.
It started off with the usual cannabis and built up very quickly to LSD, acid.
When the substance abuse was gathering pace, he just seemed to go to a downward spiral, that he was worse and worse.
The harder substances were having an effect on Burton, and the change in his behaviour was apparent to those around him.
And at one point, his mum in particular was worried that he'd overstepped the mark with his mental health, and she became concerned. One day she came back from work and she discovered in the bathroom was a lot of towels that were covered in blood, and he'd locked himself away in the bedroom. She thought it was very strange, and she suspected, and even though this has never been confirmed, that he'd castrated himself.
that kind of mutilation suggests some kind of self-hatred directed very, very specifically at a certain part of the self, which might include his sexuality and masculinity.
What amazes me is that he's gone from the very low level, just the average Joe public, and escalated very, very quickly into a monster and the way he was.
In 1997, 27-year-old Burton was still living in New Mills, Derbyshire. 14 miles away, in Greater Manchester, 17-year-old Debbie had just recently passed her driving test. 25 years on, Debbie now wishes to remain anonymous. Her words have been voiced by an actor.
I was living with my parents and my two sisters in Gatley in Stockport. It was quite a nice community. It was nice pubs, we knew neighbours, we all knew each other. It was quite normal and safe.
On Saturday, the 26th of April 1997, Debbie's day had started in the usual way.
She was en route that particular morning, on the Saturday morning, to go to a part-time job.
Debbie stopped at her local convenience store on her way to work to get some crisps and a drink. She parked her car directly outside the shop.
I was literally around the corner from my house. On the way to the shop, I noticed a man walking the opposite way, but I didn't think anything of it.
When Debbie came back out of the shop, she noticed the same man had doubled back and was lingering nearby.
I remember thinking, I've just seen you walk past. Why are you here? What do you want?
And as she went back to her vehicle, he jumped out on her and threatened her with a knife.
And he just approached me with a knife. And he said, can you get in your car and give me all your money, please? I was trapped. There's nowhere to run. If I could run, he'd run after me, and I felt I wanted to scream. I did as I was told and got in the driver's seat, and he climbed at the back of me and climbed into the passenger seat. So he's sitting next to me with a knife to my thigh while I was driving.
Well, the poor girl, is obviously terrified out of her wits. He's still threatening her with a knife and orders her to drive, not round the block, but a long way.
The knife-wielding carjacker ordered Debbie to drive him to Wales, claiming he'd never been there before and wanted to go. Debbie had only recently passed her driving test and was fairly new to the roads.
I'm trying to concentrate not to crash the car. I've never been on a motorway. There's nothing I could do. People are driving past me and I'm trying to get their attention. How can you get their attention? They're too fast. He'll see my reaction. I'm trapped. There's nothing I can do. I can't do anything.
Debbie was terrified. The 17-year-old was being held hostage in her own vehicle by a complete stranger, with no way of escape. As they headed into the remote countryside of Wales, the petrified teenager had no idea what the deadly stranger had planned for her. But one thing was for sure, Debbie's life was in grave danger. In the spring of 1997, 27-year-old loner and drug abuser Nicholas Burton was living in the small town of New Mills in Derbyshire. On the 26th of April, just 14 miles away in Stockport, Greater Manchester, 17-year-old Debbie had been on her way to work when she was abducted at knife point and ordered to take the motorway, heading west.
On the way to Wales, I was doing about 60 on the inside lane. And I was running out of petrol. So I said, we need to get petrol. He said, turn off here. There's a church, a dirt track. He ordered me to reverse near the graves. When I reversed in near the church, and then he told me to get out.
She will know that things are getting more and more isolated. She knows there's this guy in the car with a knife. I can't imagine what she was thinking, where this was going to end.
The abductor ordered Debbie to get into the boot of her own car so that she'd be hidden away when he went to refuel it.
He opened the boot. He told me to lie on my front, put my legs up, put my hands behind my back.
She was forced into going into the boot of the car. He was clearly angry, and he was taking it out on Debbie. She was petrified, as you can imagine.
I started to beg him. I didn't show any emotion before, and I was pleading with him to not hurt me.
He cut the seatbelt webbing, tied her up and gagged her.
He tied my arms and my legs together with seatbelts. He put one around my mouth and then shut the boot.
With Debbie in the boot, her abductor drove her car to a nearby petrol station, filling it up with £10 that Debbie had given him earlier. He then drove around for another 45 minutes or so, with Debbie still in the boot.
I was helpless, just thinking of my friends and my family. They're going to be worried where I am. I can't die like this. I won't. I can't. This can't be it.
I can't even begin to think how utterly horrified, terrified she must have been.
Eventually, the man stopped the car and released Debbie from the boot.
He got me out of the boot and we parked in the mountains on the side of the road. I stayed there for hours. There was no one around. He was talking absolute rubbish about drugs, about the Happy Mondays, what the songs mean to him. He's smoking cigars.
And all the time, she's trying to involve him in conversation in a desperate attempt to save her life.
I remember telling him that I was 18 in 4 weeks because I wanted him to like me. Surely, if he liked me, he's not going to hurt me.
She had the presence of mind, or maybe that survival instinct where she tried to build some kind of rapport with him. That's an incredibly difficult thing to do and took great presence of mind and bravery from her.
A rare glimmer of hope emerged as another car went by.
But he was watching my reactions the whole time. I just couldn't do it. I couldn't scream for help again because he'll use the knife.
Hours went by and eventually Debbie's abductor decided it was time to move on. They were low on fuel again and this time out of cash.
I said, I've got my bank card. I can get cash. I can get more cash. He said, okay, we'll go and get cash. And I need more petrol.
The knife-wielding man and Debbie drove down to the Welsh coastal town of Carnarvon.
He then unleashed Debbie and she went with him to the cash point to put the number in. And he then tried to get some money.
There were loads of people around. He's got his arm around me with a knife to my stomach. There's people laughing, walking past me. Couldn't do it. Couldn't do it again. I couldn't help. I wanted to say help. I just couldn't do it.
She must have been terrified. What an ordeal to take place.
Debbie had missed her opportunity to escape and was still at her abductor's mercy. He got Debbie back into the car, but this time let her sit in the passenger seat.
So he must have trusted me a little bit to not put me back in the boot to get more petrol. And we got to the pump, and I'm in the passenger seat. He gets out, fills up. He's watching me through the window, staring at me.
With the kidnapper keeping a watchful eye on his captive, Debbie would struggle yet again to make her escape.
So I just slowly I saw there was a man. The next pump on my left, there was a man, a taxi driver, at the next pump. And I thought, I can do this. I can do this. Slowly undid my seatbelt without looking at him.
She saw the opportunity to escape whilst he was filling the car up with petrol. He was using her money, and she ran, screaming and shouted.
I just ran for it to the taxi driver, sat on his knee. Just opened his door and sat on his knee.
Debbie's abductor did not pursue her.
He just calmly and casually got back into the car and just drove off as though nothing had happened.
That does actually tell us quite a lot about what's going on with him. So he seems to be quite emotionally divorced from what is going on. His language and his behaviour is very much that he's in control of this situation, but he doesn't seem to have any real fear of being caught. It does kind of suggest that this isn't some really bad psychotic episode. It's too controlled and he's too calm and going about his business as normal, almost.
Debbie had finally escaped her abductor after a horrific 11-hour ordeal. But it could have been even more terrifying if Debbie had known what had happened less than 24 hours earlier, just 5 miles away from where she was taken. Michael McGrath and his sister Rachel grew up in Wilmslow in Cheshire after the McGrath family moved there in 1970. Michael was 3 and Rachel was 5 months old.
Bright, lively, bubbly, beautiful, incredibly stubborn at times. But as my baby sister. She was an amazing pianist. It was lovely. So music was a life, really. She loved it. Really loved it.
Rachel McGrath was well educated. She was working for a building society as an assistant manager.
She was 27, got a good career ahead of her. She was a lovely girl who led life to the full. She was very much loved by her family.
Rachel had recently moved in with her boyfriend and they were settling down together.
He was very good for her and they were great as a couple. So it was great to see how happy she was.
On the evening of the 25th of April 1997, Rachel's boyfriend went out for a few drinks with friends to a pub in nearby Bramall. It was the same pub that 27-year-old Nicholas Burton had made his way to that evening.
Nicholas Burton, he was a bit of a loner. He'd left the house and he'd walked 10 miles to the pub in Bramall, where he'd been seen by numerous members of the pub, and he was prone to smoking cigars and drinking Guinness. And he was also going round the pub begging for money so that he could buy the items.
Burton attempted to interact with a number of different customers that were there that evening.
Numerous points he tried to engage in conversation with a group next to him. That was rebuffed. He made a rather lewd comment about what he was doing there, and he said, "Oh, I'm waiting to meet a beautiful woman." He clearly wasn't. He was clearly a loner on his own.
He seemed to be quite focused on a beautiful girl, and I just feel that maybe there were some strange thought processes going on then where he was definitely in the stages of planning some form of activity or action that was going to come later on. But he was obsessed with it, whatever it was, when he was just chatting in the pub.
At one point he begged money to go buy some cigars from the shop down the road and came back in.
While Rachel's boyfriend was also drinking in the same pub as Burton, Rachel had gone to visit her parents, and her brother Michael joined her there.
She was really buzzing that day because she'd been interviewed by the Daily Mail about her team at work, and there was a really lovely article where I left at about 7, And she turned around to me and said, "Don't forget Daily Mail, page 39. And it's ironic because only a few hours later she was all over the front page of pretty much all the nationals.
Rachel returned to the pub at closing time to collect her boyfriend and take him home. But while she was waiting outside in the car, a deadly monster was also in the car park, looking for someone to prey upon. On the evening of the 25th of April 1997, Nicholas Burton had been drinking in a pub in Bramall, Cheshire. The 27-year-old loner had spent the night begging for money and pestering other drinkers.
He was probably in the pub for about 4 hours. Penniless, no money. He had enough money on him to buy a single pint of Guinness, which apparently he sipped and made last that length of time.
It was closing time at the pub, and it was around 5 to 11 when he went outside for a smoke.
27-year-old Rachel McGrath's boyfriend had also been drinking in the same pub that evening, and after spending time with her parents and brother, Rachel drove to the pub to pick him up.
So she's waiting to collect him, pre-arranged meeting point by the rear door of the pub.
Unbeknown to Rachel, she wasn't alone in the car park. She was being watched.
He saw Rachel in the car, and he took the opportunity when he saw her there, parked up, doors unlocked in the passenger side, and he jumps in. She probably thought that was her boyfriend getting in.
What we think happened is that he got into the passenger door, held a knife to her, and was trying to abduct her.
Instead of driving away as the man had wanted her to, Rachel decided to get out of the car and try to escape instead.
She's no more than 30 feet, I would say, from the rear door of the pub. Goes out to the driver's door and trying to rush round to the pub entrance at the rear. And it's pretty clear that he goes round the other way and catches her at the rear of the car.
He's chased her and caught her virtually against the wall, and she's had no chance. Unfortunately, at that time, the pub was packed, but outside, everybody's having last orders, so we had no witnesses to what took place in the next period of time.
As Rachel tried to escape, the man chasing her pulled out a hunting knife that he'd been concealing and used it to stop her getting away.
Then he grabs her from behind. To incapacitate her, brings his knife up through the back of her right leg, so it comes out of the front. A second major incapacitation wound through her ribcage on the right-hand side that punctures her right lung.
The knifeman had brought defenseless Rachel to the ground with injuries that would have been agonizing for her. To stop Rachel from drawing attention to the attack from people nearby, the man then used the same knife he'd already horrifically wounded her with.
To stop her screaming, with a sawing action, hacks through her throat, severing her vocal cords and a carotid artery on the right-hand side, and actually nicking the back of her spine. With a knife that we know is about 23 centimetres long. Doesn't get any worse than that. The only thing that he didn't do was rape her. But he made a real mess of her. A real mess of her. It doesn't get any worse.
It would have been a slow death for over a few minutes. She was screaming, but there was nobody about to actually hear those screams.
The cowardly knife man then fled the scene, leaving Rachel dying alone on the cold ground outside the pub.
And that's horrible. You know, nobody nobody deserves that. And it showed you what a monster he was.
As revellers left the pub at closing time, Rachel's body was discovered. By then, it was too late to save her. Police quickly arrived at the crime scene.
The night detective, who was a DC, he absolutely did a fantastic job in sealing the pub off. so that nobody left. And we managed to get a brief chat before they were released from the pub.
Detective Sergeant Paul Moores from Greater Manchester Police remembers arriving at the chilling scene.
It's probably one of the worst set of injuries that I've ever witnessed in the whole of my career as a detective. I was on the major incident team, which covered all murders in Manchester for the last 7 years of my service.
This was incredibly brutal. This was a young woman on her own in what should have been a relatively safe area, and a completely random but targeted attack. I can see why that is shocking and deeply upsetting.
The victim had been waiting to collect her boyfriend to take him home, and this attack seemed to be entirely unprovoked.
We didn't have a clue as regards what the motive was and what the potential was of the particular offender. We still didn't know anything about him.
Nobody had seen the attack, and there was no CCTV to provide vital clues as to who had done this. Identifying the mystery killer wouldn't be a quick task.
Any forensic evidence at the scene wouldn't have been found until later. We all agreed that we'd got nothing at that stage, no evidence, and we needed a breakthrough.
While Detective Sergeant Moores took charge of the crime scene, other police officers had to break the devastating news about Rachel to her family.
We were awoken. I remember looking at the clock next to the bed. It was 2:45 a.m. We got a knock at the door, and immediately you're thinking, hang on a second, that's not good news. So I opened the door, and my parents were there with 2 policemen. So my mother was in tears, clearly, and her father was ashen-faced, and the police basically said, Michael, we need you to come with us now, please. So I got dressed and got to my parents' house about 3, and then they sat us down and said, your sister's been killed.
The family were unaware at that point of just how horrific the circumstances surrounding Rachel's death were.
My brain's going into overtime. You don't really know how to take that in. You're still trying to digest all that. My mother at that time was really struggling. She was not reacting very well to what had happened. We had to call the doctor to her to give her some sedatives.
By the morning, news of the murder had sent shockwaves through the local community and attracted national press.
So we got back to the house in Wilmslow, and then there's just a media scrum developing. We had, say, reporters outside the house that morning wanting to speak to my parents. I was keen to protect them. I managed to stop the newspapers arriving because the early pictures of in the newspapers had photographs of a tent where Rachel had been killed.
Rachel had been murdered around 11 p.m. the night before. The mystery killer had fled the scene and left her dying. Rachel's family had been informed, but the police had no further updates for them.
So the police sat down with us later that morning and said, we are starting from scratch with this. And at that stage, it's a murder. We don't understand what the motive is. We don't understand if there are any suspects. They're working way through the investigation. And it's clearly a manhunt. It's clearly a manhunt, but they've got nothing to go on.
When the police had arrived at the scene and interviewed customers still in the pub, a few of them mentioned that there'd been a new face in there that evening, a man drinking Guinness and smoking cigars.
And we managed to get the names and addresses of every single one of those people.
The identity of the customer was unknown, but even then there was nothing to suggest this mysterious man had anything to do with the murder. As Sunday evening came around with no further leads, Detective Paul Moores received a phone call. When 17-year-old Debbie had escaped in Wales, the police from where she went missing in Greater Manchester were informed.
And we put 2 and 2 together, and we didn't know at that stage that it was definitively linked. And I was briefed that I was going to go to North Wales, to Carnarvon, where Debbie had managed to escape, and progress the inquiry from there.
The police came, and I remember seeing Paul and thinking, I'm safe. I've got away, I've escaped. I was just in complete shock and relief that I got away.
We wanted to see whether there was a link to the murder, and there clearly was, because I remember this vividly, as though it was yesterday. Debbie said to me that he'd talked about smoking cigars and that he drank Guinness. And when that clicked into place, and with the inquiries that had been done with the occupants of the pub the previous night.
As the details started to fit together, police in the next town of Bangor had located Debbie's stolen car.
North Wales police found Debbie's car abandoned, having been involved in a bit of a collision with a wall. So that activated even more inquiries.
The police immediately contacted all of the nearby hotels, trying to find the wanted man. And a staff member at one of the hotels soon gave Detective Sergeant Moores the news he'd been waiting to hear.
He was there. And as soon as it was mentioned by him about the cigars and the Guinness, I knew it was him. You know, my gut feeling had become an adrenaline-pumping situation. And I asked for a firearms team to go and make the arrest.
Armed police gathered in Bangor, Wales, ready to storm the hotel room, expecting to find Debbie's abductor on the other side of the door. There was even more at stake for Detective Sergeant Moores. He was hoping this raid would finally help him find Rachel's killer. In April 1997, 17-year-old Debbie had been abducted from her hometown of Gatley, Greater Manchester, and forced to drive at knife point to North Wales. Debbie had escaped, and the police had located where her kidnapper may be hiding. As they got ready to storm the hotel room, Detective Sergeant Paul Moores briefed them that this may also be the man responsible for killing 27-year-old Rachel McGrath in Bramall, Cheshire, just over 24 hours earlier.
And I emphasised the seriousness and the horrendous nature of the attack. And I made sure that they knew full well that the room was to be sealed off completely. And we got him. And that's when it all started to kick into place.
The man apprehended at the hotel was 27-year-old Nicholas Burton, the drug abuser who'd been drinking in the pub the night Rachel was killed. Items found in his hotel room gave the police even more to potentially link him to the murder.
They'd found bloodstains on the knife. They'd found bloodstains in the sink. There was some trainers that were drying that might be blood. And there was also a jacket in the wardrobe that had a stain on it, which could have been the blood stain, and turned out it was.
There are some similarities between his appearance and an individual who they believe was in the pub prior to my sister's murder.
Nicholas Burton had been caught with incriminating evidence. But if officers thought it would be an easy conviction, they were wrong.
He wouldn't speak to the police. He didn't speak when he was interviewed. No admissions. He wouldn't have any blood samples taken from him. He was not cooperating.
The results of the DNA analysis linked the knife found in Burton's hotel room to Rachel McGrath.
Once that came back, statistically, it was a 1 in 300 million chance of it not being Rachel's blood, so at that point you know it's him.
Burton was still not cooperating with the police, and they were unable to find a motive that linked him to the crimes. Despite Burton's silence, detectives were confident the evidence against him was strong. On the 30th of April 1997, they charged him with the abduction of Debbie. 2 days later, they charged him with Rachel's murder. To secure a conviction for murder, the police would have to prove that Burton had fully intended to kill.
But you've still got no sense of any motive, no reason. And as any rational human being, you're turning these things over in your mind and going, why has this happened?
Another element police would have to prove is that Burton was of sound mind at the time he committed the crimes. Just prior to the trial, Burton started to make some previously unmentioned claims.
He said he thought he was God and that the voices were telling him to do these things. You know, again, it shows a lot of premeditation.
There was no supporting evidence from the past, from his medical records, that he'd suffered from any kind of mental illness. I think that was just Burton cottoning on to an idea in an attempt to save his skin.
He never claimed this before, so the timing does become quite important.
The trial started at Liverpool Crown Court on the 23rd of March 1998, and Burton carried on using the same excuses as to why he'd acted the way he did.
He tried to plead not guilty on the grounds of diminished responsibility, and when that failed completely, he went down the lines of he was unfit through insanity.
Burton's attempts to argue he wasn't in the right frame of mind when he killed Rachel and abducted Debbie were quickly quashed by the professionals.
The prosecution called 2 psychiatrists who say there's absolutely no question of him being diminished responsibility. He knew exactly what he was doing.
We had the reports coming in from the psychiatrists saying he's the most dangerous man I've ever had to interview in my whole career, professional career.
That's quite a chilling assessment to come from 2 separate professionals who both saw that level of danger in him. So I think what they were saying in that is this was not an isolated incident. This is something that is part of who this man is, and that maybe he's going to continue to be a danger.
In my service, I've never heard a psychiatrist give such strong evidence that showed that he was actually sane, but he was a dangerous, dangerous man, and still is, in my opinion.
There was still the issue of proving that Burton had a motive, thereby showing for certain that it was a premeditated attack and that it was in fact murder rather than manslaughter.
We had a witness who was in prison, and he had been in the hospital wing with Burton, and a conversation had been taking place where Burton had suggested that he'd been reading a book which was based around SAS tactics, and that was the motive behind bringing down Rachel from a standing position after he'd hacked her throat.
He was bragging about what he'd done to make himself look the big man in prison, no doubt.
Provided a motive as to why he killed her in that way, and it also showed that he'd premeditated the murder. He knew what he was doing. He was calculated and manipulative with the way that he attacked her.
Detective Sergeant Paul Moores and the McGrath family were at the trial every day, and Debbie was able to come face to face with her abductor to watch him account for what he'd done to her.
He looked like a rat, all stooped, and he looked pathetic. He had the odd glance at us and just looked... He just didn't have any emotion. Yeah, just little, pathetic. Just didn't have any remorse, nothing.
Nicholas Burton took to the stand himself to give his account of what happened on those fateful days in April 1997. As his own barrister asked him questions, the courtroom watched on in disbelief.
I remember I was shaking. My legs were shaking when he came out with this answer, when he could have dropped a pin in the courtroom. It was that silent. He was asked the question, what were you going to do to Debbie?
He said he wanted to rape me and kill me. I knew that was his intention, but to actually hear the words was too much to hear. And in front of all those people, it's just more real. Hearing the words matter of fact, no emotion whatsoever. It was just evil.
It was a dramatic moment in the trial, but it was It was really chilling, and something I'll never forget.
It was deadly silent for a few seconds, and then poor Debbie, she realised what he'd said and the impact it had on her, and she ran out of court in tears. Three at least members of the jury burst into tears. One of my officers, he burst into tears. So I had to physically take him away and say, look, we've got to be professional here.
Burton shocked the court further by saying he would then have looked for a third victim. After a 2-week trial, the jury went out to deliberate whether Nicholas Burton was guilty or whether he didn't have the mental capacity to commit murder.
There were 4 counts. The first was Rachel's murder. The second was the abduction of Debbie. The third one was the false imprisonment of Debbie. And the fourth one was threats to kill her.
It was guilty on all 4 counts, and it was unanimous. So all 12 members of that jury all believed he was guilty based on the evidence.
Nicholas Burton received 3 life sentences for the murder of Rachel, the abduction of Debbie, and the false imprisonment of Debbie. The judge also handed Burton an additional 10 years for threats to kill Debbie.
He ended by saying, I shall recommend to the Home Secretary that you're never released.
The judge had reassured the court that Burton would never walk the streets again. 25 years later, and due to changes in the law that removed that power from the Home Secretary and passed it to parole boards, a shocking twist came about.
So we received a phone call from our victim liaison officer on the 3rd of March 2021. They said to us that Burton was eligible for parole, potentially as soon as May that year. We heard the trial judge make it very clear that the recommendation to the Home Secretary was that Burton should never be released. There's got to be some mistake here, there's got to be some error.
Debbie, now in her 40s, also received a phone call to tell her that Burton was up for parole.
We left the court that day knowing he's never coming out, thinking that's it for life. So it's just complete shock. And something has gone wrong.
If he gets parole and he's back out on the streets, no doubt in my mind, is a good chance that he could commit further offences and upset a lot of lives as a result again.
Rachel's family and Debbie are campaigning to prevent Burton's parole, to ensure that he stays behind bars forever.
We just don't want people like this walking the streets again.
He needs to be locked up for the rest of his life. The risk is too much, it's too high for him to be released.
I don't think he's ever going to change. I think this is part of his personality rather than it being a temporary and contained psychotic episode, for example.
The nature of Rachel's brutal murder impacted even seasoned police officers during the case.
In all my service, 32 years, I've never, ever experienced something as horrific as the circumstances surrounding that case. There's not a day goes by where I don't think about this case. It's the worst one I've ever been involved in.
And Nicholas Burton's actions on the 25th and 26th of April 1997 have had lifelong effects for Rachel's family.
My father's a broken man. My mother's never recovered. I don't know any mother who would. So he destroyed my parents. He destroyed my parents.
And for Debbie, she'll forever live with the trauma of what happened to her.
I never really processed it properly. I just found it too painful to talk about. Thinking that I spent 11 hours with this monster and what he could have done to me and what he did to Rachel. It's like something out of a horror film. Who does those things? It's just evil, just a monster, just inhumane.
Nicholas Burton was a loner and a drug addict who went out with the intention to rape and murder innocent strangers. Psychiatrists agreed he was the most dangerous man they'd met, and the sentencing judge advised that he should never be allowed to walk the streets again. Nicholas Burton will forever be known as one of Britain's most evil killers.
You wouldn't expect a spiritualist minister to lie, have affairs, or borrow thousands of pounds and never return it. But even if he did all that, would he go so far as to kill? Killer in My Village, available now, new on Sky Crime.
To get a pizza. 2 boys have died after being stabbed in Bristol last night.
It's heartbreaking, heartbreaking.
His dressing gown is on the bed and you could see where he got undressed to go out that night. And I just so wish he'd just put his pyjamas back on and just stayed in.
This is an attack on 2 children, committed by children. In all my years as a police officer, one of the most horrific weapons I've seen. This is an investigation that will live with me and my colleagues for the rest of our careers and our lives.
What we are told is that one of the boys was living on this street, so it really has hit people here hard.
I managed to sit down in front of him and he knew I was there. He knew I was with him. But he was so pale. He was very pale. He just kept saying to me, "Mum, I want to go to sleep."
Try and get the kids. You try and keep your child safe. But obviously, someone, took him.
The tunes, because summer's here, and a kiss, we're ready to play.
Mason was just like the sweetest kid ever. He would always make me laugh. He's just like a silly kid. We'd do like prank videos together. And like just typical brother-sister relationship. But he took it always the next level and he would always have to try and go a step ahead and try to like make my day just full of fun. We always grew up close. From the moment he was born, I was like infatuated by him. I was obsessed with him. I wouldn't want to stop hugging him. And he was just really sweet and so pure, and his heart is so kind. And it's really rare in life you come across people that are that nice and loving. We had a bond that I can't even explain.
Max was 16. He was a great character. He was always full of laughs, joking. It's very rare he was angry or annoyed, and even if he was, after 5 minutes, he would be back to his normal self. He was loud, clumsy, very tall, but he was also very kind, gentle, very loving, very respectful. He was just a beautiful kid. He was definitely a mama's boy. If he was sat on the sofa, he would sit on the arm of the chair and put his legs over me. And he's 6'2", so trying to sit on my lap, that's what I miss about him a lot, because it was the closeness. He would give me a cuddle, never embarrassed to give me a cuddle. I loved him to bits, I really did. He was my boy.
Max and Mason grew up in South Bristol in Knoll West. They were best friends, going through nursery, juniors and secondary school together.
They both joined us when they were in year 7. That was back in September 2018. Mason, he gave us all in his subject areas and particularly enjoyed art, where he was very, very talented. And he enjoyed his food technology. Then Max loved his football and he was more into his maths. And he had a flair for maths. I know I taught him.
They were just a good team. You know, like Mason was the quiet one, Max was the loud one. So I think Max brought Mason out of his shell. It was just a nice friendship.
Both had loving families. Max was the youngest of 4 and Mason the youngest of 3. During the pandemic, Mason's dad, Shane, died from COVID. Mason was just 13.
Me and his dad was very protective of Mason. He never went out Mason. He was just PlayStation mad. I think Mason was playing the PlayStation when he was 3. But I thought, well, if he's in the house, he's safe.
Always on the PlayStation, always chatting to each other on the PlayStation. What I would give to hear his voice now, shouting down the PlayStation.
Nikki was going on a rare night out with friends. Before she left, she tried hard to persuade Mason to order a takeaway.
If he'd have just said to me, I go, all right, Matt, I'll get that McDonald's now, I think this would have happened. And this is why I think, I wish Mason, I sat there and think, Mason, I wish that you would have just, that poxy PlayStation, instead of saying, oh, I'm on a game, I can't play, I'm busy. If you'd have just said, oh, to his mate, hang on a minute, I'm going to get an Uber, I'm going to get McDonald's delivered, I'll be back on 9 in half an hour. If he'd have only just said that, this would have happened, because he wouldn't have got out. This is the thing, he wouldn't have got out.
Just a few streets away, Max was also at home with his mum and her partner.
Trevor come down to go and get a drink of water, and he passed him on the stairs at about 22:11, and he said he was coming down to feed the cats. So he came down, fed the cats, and then he was in his dressing gown, so he wasn't even dressed.
By now, Mason was hungry, so he messaged his best friend. It was around 11 when Max sneaked out.
That's the saddest thing. When he left the house, he locked the dog in the kitchen, and he took his key with him, he took his phone, and he didn't know that would be the last time he'd walk out the house.
Mason was quick to answer the door, every second caught on the CCTV cameras outside his home. There's a car in the street. It passes them. At the wheel, 45-year-old Anthony Snook, with 4 teenage passengers armed with a sword and machetes.
So I think weapons is probably a more accurate version than knives, because these weapons are, in fact, one of them is a sword. It's a sword that is intended to cause serious harm. A horrific weapon. Probably in all my years as a police officer, one of the most horrific weapons I've seen.
Max and Mason don't notice the car, but everyone in it is watching them. It makes a U-turn at the end of the street and comes back. Suddenly, the 4 teenagers jump out and chase the best friends.
The boys ran for their lives, and sadly in doing so, suffered those injuries. Chills me to think of it. Horror, shock, fright. They must have been absolutely petrified.
In the panic, the best friends become separated, ending up on different sides of the street. Mason is on the far side, seen running past the white van. It was 2-on-1, 17-year-old Riley Tolliver and a 14-year-old attacking him. Mason is trying to get home, but collapses just meters from his front door. 16-year-old Cody Westcott and a 15-year-old chase Max. Cody stabs Max, but the other boy won't stop, chasing him around this white car. Max manages to get away, but it's too late. He's already dying. The attack lasted just 33 seconds.
A car pulled up outside my house, and Max's friend was shouting out, Leanne, Max has been stabbed. And I said, no, he's not, he's in bed. And then it hit me. So I was screaming for the door, someone to open the door, and they literally drove me straight down. I said, Max, Mum's here. He heard me, he opened up his eyes.
said, Mum, I just want to go to sleep. It was nice to know that he knew that I was there, even though that he was dying, and I knew he was because I could tell. He was just so pale. He was cold.
Well, I had a phone call from Mason's phone, and it was the police on the phone. And I thought, is this some sort of wind-up? You know, it's like, oh, this is, you know, the police, you know, and son's been injured. The whole road was sort of taped up, so I had to get through a lot of tape, and it was just lights everywhere. It was all a bit of a blur. It was just a bit... Well, no one told you nothing?
I was just going to bed and Nikki phoned up, and all she said at the time was, Mason's been stabbed. That was all. He's at the BRI.
I think one of Mason's friend at school, his mum, she gave me a lift to the BRI, which was the same hospital that Shane died in as well.
I walked into this room not knowing where I was going, and there was quite a few doctors, nurses, police in this room, round a bed.
I kept saying, what's going on? And, oh, we'll get you an update. So I was expecting them to say, oh, we're going to do this, we're going to do that, and do this and do that. Well, they didn't. They sort of stared at you, Mason's mum. I said, yeah. And they said, we're so sorry. And that was basically it. And so we walked out. I went, really?
I said I wanted to see him. So they let me go in and see him. And I was just in shock. I couldn't cry. I just gave him a kiss and gave him a cuddle. And that was it, really. I went into, I suppose, shock.
So it was literally when we got to there, they allowed us to go and see him. They were still working on him when I walked in the room. And then they stopped. That was hard. It was so hard.
By the early hours of Sunday morning, at two different hospitals across the city, Max and Mason had both died, within 15 minutes of each other.
Remember it vividly. It was a Sunday morning, or it was the Sunday morning. It was around about 8:30, and my vice principal called me, and she said, Vic, I've just got off the phone to Leanne, which is Max's mum, and all she could say was, he's gone.
We come home and the whole road is cornered off, so you can't get down the road. And I just saw my brother's coat in the middle of the road, and I noticed his coat because it was his favourite coat, but it was all like ripped up. And I ran straight to his room to see if he was there, because I was like, yeah, he's definitely there. And then I opened the door and he wasn't there. It's like, I was just like, I couldn't figure out why he wasn't there.
Best friends, innocent schoolboys murdered on their doorstep. But why? It was all about revenge. An hour earlier that same Saturday night, there was an attack on a house 3 miles away. Bricks had been thrown, the woman inside, a mother, was hurt and had to go to hospital. Her son was Cody Westcott. He wanted revenge. He gathered his cousin, Riley Tolliver, and 2 other boys who we can't name because of legal reasons. Anthony Snook was friends with Westcott's mum. He was their chauffeur. Convinced people from Max and Mason's neighbourhood were behind the attack, Snook drove them across the city from Hartcliffe to Knoll West.
Every day I go through what were they thinking, looking at their actions, looking at the way they drove around Knoll West, trying to find a victim. It's obvious that they were intent on committing serious harm to anybody they could get their hands on. And I think, they armed themselves with weapons. They hunted around the estate to find, sadly, those two boys, and they attacked them for no reason whatsoever.
After they stabbed the boys, they jumped back in the car, tyres screeching, leaving Max and Mason dying in the street. Within minutes, they're home, but panic. Getting rid of evidence, a fire is lit and they burn their clothes, trying to hide the knives before going out for food.
And chillingly for me, what we do know is they even stopped off at McDonald's after attacking these two boys. I think it speaks volumes, really. Two beautiful boys lost their lives and they went to McDonald's for an early morning breakfast.
The police wasted no time trying to find the killers.
So this attack happened at 11:15. It was a very, very quick attack, 33 seconds in total. The first call to the police came 4 minutes after. Within 10 minutes, we'd identified that vehicle. Within 59 minutes, Anthony Snook was in custody. Once we had Anthony Snook, we had a foundation for the investigation, and we just built from there.
Mr. Snook, can you just listen to my colleague a minute?
Hello. Anthony Snook has just been arrested.
So I'll be placing you under arrest for murder, 1 count of murder, so you don't have to say anything.
But en route to the police station, they get a call from the hospital. Mason has died.
So the circumstances are still the same. Your vehicle was linked to where the stabbing has taken place, and subsequently someone has been murdered, all right?
Then a second call. Max has now died.
Before we get out, you're further arrested for another count of murder, okay? So you don't have to say anything, but it may harm your defence if you do not mention when...
Snook admitted he was the driver, but said he had nothing to do with their plan.
So I mean, they're screaming in the car at me, stop. Didn't know they were going to jump out, didn't know any weapons was in the car. I had no intentions, so none of it. I didn't have any idea about it. And I was abused that they put me in that situation,
The 4 teenagers were unknown to the police. We didn't get to interview Anthony Snook until sometime on Sunday afternoon, but he wasn't forthcoming and giving us any names. By the help and support of the community, we were able to narrow it down quite quickly. We were able to identify certainly 2 of the individuals, and then good old-fashioned detective work led to the other 2.
Today, 2 boys aged 15 and 16 were arrested on suspicion of murder.
They knew we were coming and we weren't going to stop until they were in custody. A number of doors, countless doors, a number of addresses were searched, and we were simply chasing them down until we found them.
Righty, listen fella then, alright, so time is
4 days after Snook was arrested, there was a knock on the door for the oldest boy, Riley Tolliver.
Do say maybe begin. Just listen. All right. Yes, of course, Cap. So just
by the end of the week, all their killers had been caught.
Has received naming you along with others as being responsible for the murders of Max Dixon and Mason Wrist on Saturday.
This is an attack on 2 boys that were unconnected, 2 children that were unconnected, committed by children. In my police service, thankfully, I'll never have an investigation like this to investigate again.
"300 people gathered and roads were closed as hundreds of balloons were released in memory of 16-year-old Max and 15-year-old Mason.
Bristol was a city in shock. In the days after their deaths, there were spontaneous gatherings on the streets.
This world is never ever going to be the same without
4 days on, Max's mum, Leanne, addressed the crowds.
And I don't want anybody else to go through what I've going through and what Mason's mum is going through. But I just wanted to say thank you, and I do appreciate it from the bottom of my heart. Thank you, and I'm just... Thank you.
It's that big word, the big M word, murder. they were taken from us. We wasn't prepared for it, mentally prepared, which is very, very difficult.
At the boys' school, the pupils held a spontaneous vigil.
That period after the deaths of the boys, I have to say, have been some of the most challenging periods I've had to deal with. It's one of those things that you're never trained to know how to cope with. You know, nobody prepares you to say, when you're standing up to lead an assembly, to share the awful news that 2 of our young people have been tragically murdered, and you're partway through a message and you're overcome with emotion.
Well, Ashton Gates is paying tribute to Max Dixon and Mason Rist.
And Bristol City and Leeds United football fans came together to remember them. On the 9th of October, the trial began. All 5 were charged with 2 counts of murder. 3 of the group were children. The prosecution said the group were on a joint mission, acting as a pack. When they saw Max and Mason, they thought they'd spotted those responsible for the earlier attack on the house, or at the very least, people connected with it.
I don't know what was in their heads. The boys were completely not connected to any offences that took place in the Hartcliffe area. So to my mind, absolutely a case of mistaken identity.
The court heard how Mason, who was stabbed once in the back and then in his chest, suffered unsurvivable injuries. Max was stabbed once in his abdomen and had instant severe blood loss.
I'm a human being, I'm a parent. These were 2 boys going about their business. They were boys just out being friends. But these boys were cut down in the prime of their lives, and that's a horrible word to use. But they were attacked with swords for no reason whatsoever.
After a trial lasting 5.5 weeks and 3 days of discussions, the jury came back.
Today at 6, 4 teenagers and a man in his 40s are convicted of murdering 2 teenagers in a case of mistaken identity.
Max's mum, Leanne, had her head in her hands as the verdicts were given. Mason's mum, Nikki, cheered as the first one was read out.
We thank the jury for having to see what we've seen, and we thank them for coming to the correct decision as far as we as a family are concerned.
There are no words to express how thankful I am to everyone. I will be forever grateful to them. It's just, I wish we didn't have to be here today, but we've got some sort of justice for our boys. So thank you, everybody.
Snook was first to be sentenced on the 19th of November. Today, Snook remained emotionless as the Honourable Mrs. Justice May sentenced him to a minimum of 38 years in prison.
He was the car driver. He could have made decisions that would have effectively stopped this from happening. He drove those 4 individuals, all armed, trying to find victims. For me, he is so influential on the decisions made. He was the adult that could have changed the course of this incident.
Snook will probably die in prison.
It doesn't matter if someone gets 50 years, 100 years or 2 years, it's not going to bring him back. These people have still got their life. I think, personally, you know, you do a life is a life, which means that you, whatever age you are, you've committed that murder, you go in there and you die in prison. You don't ever come out.
On December the 19th, the rest of the group were back in front of the judge. Riley Tolliver had turned 18, Cody Westcott now 17, and a 16 and a 15-year-old. We can't reveal their identities because they were too young, but the judge did decide to name Westcott as he was the main ringleader.
how scared Mason and Max would have been being chased by 4 boys they didn't know, boys who were carrying those long knives. Mason being stabbed and dying outside his front door where his mother has to walk every day.
The 16-year-old was told he must serve a minimum of 18 years, the 15-year-old at least 15 years, Riley Tolliver and Cody Westcott a minimum of 23.
Nothing can bring Mason and Max back. No sentence which this court passes can lessen the sense of loss and grief caused to their families, nor does it represent in any way the value of those young lives.
Cody Westcott waved to Max and Mason's families as he was led away.
Today, Riley Tolliver, Cody Westcott and 2 other teenage boys were sentenced to 2 life imprisonment each. Collectively, with Anthony Snook, they will serve a total of 118 years. This is a desperate case with no winners. 4 children will spend the rest of their juvenile life and most of their adult life in prison. And 2 families will not celebrate Christmas with their sons.
I'm still very angry with them, but I still think they're lucky because they're alive. Their family can get to see them, they can get to talk to them. I've not got that privilege anymore. It's justice, that's what they deserve, but it still doesn't take away my pain.
I don't know life without him, so now I'm in like new territory. I go into his room and he's got like a dressing gown that smells just like him. Like his headset is there, his like controller's there, he loved playing his game, and life just feels unfinished. It feels like it's not done yet for him. It's still like that's not it for him. Like he's gonna come back and play his game, do his coursework, and it's like he's on holiday somewhere, like he's had a break and he's gone somewhere, he's coming back.
I don't think there was one person in this building that wasn't affected by it, even when you just think 2 members of our team aren't here anymore. And it doesn't matter whether or not you're a year 7 who potentially has never met Max and Mason or come across them. They're still part of Team John Williams, and we're 2 players down.
I talk to him sometimes. Yeah. I say, what do you think of this, mate? Of course you think of him, you know. You're never going to forget him, are you? Ever.
I would rather have had they took my life, because if they said to me, sorry, no, you need to go, Nikki, and we need to bring Mason back, I'd happily go.
It's hard. It's very hard. I don't feel like I'm a mum. I feel like I've lost being a mum, if you know what I mean. I'm trying to learn who I'm going to become, because obviously that person before Max is gone. I'm learning to live without Max. I'm learning to take one day at a time. I think the only good thing is, because Max was such a great character, full of life, and we had that bond, I know that Max would want me to get up every day and go out and make a good life for myself and enjoy it, and not sit and dwell on what's happened. I'm lucky I had 16 really good years with him, and I loved him very much, and I still love him very much.
I hundreds of thousands of waves, none of them reach the shore. Despite all the obstacles, life is so long. Years still pass like the ocean, even though it is wide. Clouds still fly far away. How to dissolve into hundreds of small waves in the middle of a great sea of love. Let it still flat for thousands of years. I think about